Morphology brings about far more benefits for almost all dyslexic kids. And what we need to be doing is we need to be teaching reading and writing through morphology.
Hi everyone, so I'm here today with
Martin Bloomfield.
Dr. Martin works in supporting students with various different learning needs, and I came across him on LinkedIn actually, and I'm glad to have the time with him, and I'm very grateful for the time he's made to talk to us a little bit about supporting students with different learning needs. Dr. Martin, can you tell me a bit more about what you do and your background?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a pleasure to talk to you. It really is. Don't worry about this. I love spending time talking to people who have got similar interests. So you've more or less hit the nail on the head. I'm interested in those with special educational needs. I'm interested in inclusivity and inclusion. I'm interested in essentially building a more loving society. Particularly, I have interest in intercultural perspectives on special educational needs and neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And I do a lot of work in diversity and ethics as well.
And you know what, Dr. Martin, should I call Dr. Martin or Dr. Bloomfield? What are you used to?
Martin.
Okay, sorry.
The name's out there on LinkedIn, but I was persuaded to do that. I mean, really, I'm Martin.
No, I understand. Martin, I've been in Qatar now for 10 years, and I met parents from various backgrounds. I've had parents who, are a bit more resistant to the idea that their child might have learning needs, and it's a very difficult concept to get around, and quite a difficult thing to accept as a parent. I can appreciate that. So I've always worked with helping those parents to understand that we're a part of a dialogue. We're all here to for that one primary aim of supporting the child and getting a learning experience, a meaningful learning experience. And over the years, I'm really encouraged by the fact that parents have now come on board. They will sign the children up for getting additional support. Of all the parents that I've met, the parents who have children with learning needs are always at the forefront of, I want to meet the teachers, I want to find out how my child is doing, how can I support the child at home? And it really is, it can be heartbreaking actually, because the parents are trying their utmost best, and it makes you as an educator actually want to give it. I said to a colleague the other day that I just wish I had only this nurture class.
Something really interesting about the history of dyslexia research and the history of how dyslexia came to be accepted is that the big leaps forward, the great moves forward in acceptance and in creating schools actually came from mothers with dyslexic kids. So I did a video a little while ago on the history of dyslexia. I'll put a link up if you'd like.
Please, yes, send me the link.
Yeah, I discuss, all the research, the men doing the research, and then the women who are the parents actually getting down and making a difference, setting up dyslexia schools, setting up dyslexia units. And as you said, it's the concerned parents who actually make the difference in our lives.
One of the texts I teach is it's an extract from the late Benjamin Zephaniah. Oh, that was heartbreaking. The late Benjamin Zephaniah it's an extract called Young and Dyslexic, You've Got It Going On. And he talks in that extract about, it's a GCSE extract, he talks in the extract about growing up, he didn't have support. He'd be called these horrified names by his teachers. He'd be told, oh, you're stupid, you think differently. That's because he challenged their way of thinking. When as a teacher, God knows what teachers you had, but as a teacher, you're supposed to encourage the students challenging your way of thinking, you should be challenging each other. But he was told, oh, well, not everyone's made for school. Maybe you can be a great sportsman. And he said the support he found, ironically, was from his girlfriend and his sister, like you say, at home. They're the ones that helped him write his poetry down and get his poetry out there. And I said to the kids that his extract is great because it works in two ways. Half of it is about the criticism that he faced growing up, but the other half is about the positive words of encouragement that he wants to give young dyslexic people now. He says that it's not your problem. If anyone has a problem with it, it's with the person. It's nothing to do with you. We are the architects. We are the designers. It's the non-dyslexics that have a problem, not us.
But also, something else that we don't often realize is that when you're at school, a lot of the time, your value is given in your grades because school is about the grades. And so if you're getting low grades, you're getting low value. And so you are devalued simply because of the grades you're getting.
And a student is more than a grade. A grade is a test. It's a test and it's a lesson. I say to my students that A lesson learned is, if you got a C, for example, it's a lesson. You know what you have to do next time. You know how to improve, and then when you get that slightly better grade, it's okay. But you don't. That's not you. That is, it's something that you did. It's like if I ran the marathon, it took me 20 minutes. Do I just amount to? Is that all I am then? Just a single digit or double digit. It's a student is more than that.
That does something, by the way. It does something to you existentially. It does something to how you view yourself. And it does something to how you view your ability to go forward later in life. Almost every dyslexic will tell you the same thing, that they probably feel some form of imposter syndrome. They probably feel like they're not good enough, they're not worth it. I was speaking to some extremely talented people over the weekend, and something happened, and one of them was touched deeply and very upset by it. And it wasn't anything that I or my other colleagues and friends said. It was something that came from outside. And this ability to be rocked so deeply by a couple of words comes from school, and it comes from childhood. And so, this is a big thing. And what you'll get, of course, is if you're graded low, if you don't get good grades, a number of things happen. One of them is that you start to avoid work. You don't like work. You don't want to take part in work. Another is that you get something that they call learned helplessness. Now, learned helplessness is essentially you learn that you can't do it. So even if you're like intellectually you can, you've already formed the opinion of yourself. Because it's not a fear of learning anything, it's a fear of not learning it. It's a fear of the pain you go through not learning it. So this fear of learning or not learning, it's this we have to tackle. We have to tackle this learned almost phobia, this anxiety. Because there is anxiety. We know about maths anxiety, for instance. I mean, this is well documented. We know about anxiety in all sorts of different subjects. So there is an anxiety. So it's the teacher's job to create a learning environment, which is a positive learning environment. It's difficult because, of course, kids are going to the same rooms every day. And these rooms are kind of anchored to that fear of an anxiety about learning. So the teacher's got to work out ways to refresh these rooms, work out ways to break that anxiety link. Because that's there, by the way. It's there and you can't do anything about it. All you can do is break that link. So you can't pretend it's not there. We can't hope it goes away, because it won't. The kids don't have the resources within themselves, generally speaking. I mean, some of them might, but generally speaking, we can't expect the kids to have the resources within themselves to break that cycle from within. Because you know what, they're 10 years old, 11 years old, 8 years old, 13 maybe. You can't expect a vulnerable growing child to have those cognitive and emotional resources. So it's our job to break those links.
So there's two approaches to supporting students with different learning needs. There's the inclusive approach, where the students are within the same room as their peers and they're getting additional support within the classroom. And then there's also the approach where the students are taken out of the regular learning experience and they're given one-to-one support.
I'm inclined to the ones that work best for the kids. And I think most teachers will be on my side. I'm guessing you are as well. So in some cases, the children themselves will prefer to be taught alone or taught in smaller groups. In some cases, they prefer to be taught in a larger group. And so first thing to say is that we have to take the needs of the children into account when we're making these decisions. Then we have to take the needs of the wider classroom into account when we're making these decisions. And I think, so there's a couple of ways of looking at it. On the one hand, if you like, generally speaking, including everybody together has a huge range of benefits, a massive range of benefits. But on the other hand, it has some very, very significant drawbacks, which we have to be careful of. One of which, of course, is the classroom size. Can a teacher cope? Will it end up disrupting the rest of the class? Will there be specific types of bullying involved? Feelings of isolation, so all sorts of things. So what we need to do is we need a child-centered approach in this respect. And I know that child-centered approach sounds a little bit, corporate speak.
No, but it's true. I mean, in this context, it really does apply. There's no other phrase that could replace that.
When I was at primary school, This is in the 70s. When I was at primary school, there was a class called the remedial class. Now, thank goodness I wasn't in the remedial class.
What is that? What's a remedial class?
Until I was about 16 or 17, by the way, and there's a reason that I didn't find out till I was 16 or 17. I didn't find out till I was about 16 or 17 what the word remedial meant. So I went through my childhood believing that the word remedial was an extremely negative word. It was one of these insult words. It meant you were a fool, you were an idiot, you were incapable. Yeah. That's what I thought remedial meant. When we were at school, no one talked to the kids from the remedial class because you might catch something, it might be contagious. We were 7, we were 8. This is what we used to think. 6 years old. So as a young child, that's how you looked at these kids. These were the kids with learning difficulties. Now, it was only when I was 16 and 17 that I learnt what remedial actually meant. It comes from the same word medical and remed. It's helping. You know, now I found this out, by the way, because I couldn't spell. Throughout my school life, I couldn't spell. And I got bored of not being able to spell when I was about 16, 17. And I taught myself rudimentary etymology and morphology. Etymology, the roots of words. Morphology, essentially the Lego building blocks of words.
You taught that to yourself?
I taught that to myself. And suddenly, I was able to spell in ways which I'd never assumed I'd be able to do. I was also able to understand what words meant. It turned out, when I was doing the research only a few years ago, that morphology brings about far more benefits for almost all dyslexic kids. And what we need to be doing is we need to be teaching reading and writing through morphology and morphological awareness far more than we are at school, because that helps dyslexic kids read faster, read more fluently, write better, spell, understand the meanings of words, predict words they haven't yet seen. This predictive fluency, morphology is incredibly important for this. Now, I hadn't been introduced to that. You know, to me, I was in undiscovered country as a later teenager, teaching myself to spell. I still find spelling names difficult because I don't understand the morphology or the etymology of names. But generally speaking, I read and write English very well indeed. Whereas in the old days, I read and wrote English extraordinarily poorly.
Because you taught yourself morphology, and that became a gateway.
Of what worked for me, and indeed what works for many, many dyslexics.
Okay, so Martin, I had a few questions for you, which was, what strategies do you find most effective for meeting the diverse needs of students, especially those with different needs? So you mentioned the introduction of morphology. Do you have anything you could add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, so there are different types of strategies. One is like the humanist strategy. So I tend to begin by trying to listen to the kids, trying to observe the kids, trying to build confidence. And it's this ability to build the confidence and the desire to learn. And there are ways of doing that, all sorts of ways of doing that. We needn't go into it just yet, but there is ways of building confidence to learn.
I never thought about building confidence.
This is such an important step that we have to take. And then things like, obviously, morphology. If you've got really young kids who are struggling with reading and writing, there's something called orthographic mapping. There's phonological awareness.
Orthographic mapping?
Orthographic mapping is a technique where you can start to help kids understand the relationships between the phonemes and the graphemes, the sounds and the symbols. And it's a fairly simple technique, and it really helps kids. I also think that things like making... Now, I'm going to use a word here and be very sort of careful when I use it. Making learning multisensory. Now, when I say multisensory, I do not mean that there are different senses for learning, you know, auditory learning and visual learning. There's
I remember VAC. VAC came and went.
Absolutely, came and went, and quite happily it went. But what I mean is, when we learn, one of the things that happens when we learn best when different parts of the brain are active. And one of the ways of making different parts of the brain active is to become, as it were, embodied in our learning. There's something called embodied learning, which is probably a better word than multisensory. And this can include all sorts of things. It can include learning with rhythm. It can include tapping and clicking things out. It can include rhyming. It can include movement. It can include all sorts of things. But the trick is to make it as it were, as varied as possible. To basically activate as many parts of the brain as possible. And this is a really useful way of helping people learn. So also then, of course, reducing the text. So reducing the amount of text we give people.
Ah, I see. Reducing the text.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, most of the time when we give text, most of it's not necessary.
It's very true.
I mean, I had to read Shakespeare. I never read any Shakespeare, but I used to go and see it at the theatre when I was given the opportunity that I understood the play. I mean, why did I have to read it rather than watch it? You know, if the goal is to understand the play, then why am I only allowed one route into doing that?
Yeah, I bet if William Shakespeare was alive now, he'd be mortified that the play script exists in class, and he'd be like, no, it should be as a means to performance, right? A means to performing the play, right? Understanding its performance, watching performances, rehearsals, and I remember I was teaching Macbeth's soliloquy, if it were done when it's done, then for well it were done quickly. The kids didn't get it until I performed it, pacing up and down the classroom. I said, do you see what the mental processes that he's going through, the turmoil he's facing? He's pacing up and down, and it's clear in the lines, but it's only evident through performance.
And isn't it incredible that we, as an education system, have turned something so visceral, so full of life and death, so full of passion and anger and fear and pain and emotions into something dry that kids fear because they know they're going to get bored.
We made it into we made Shakespeare into condensed milk. It's just
It's another thing.
Yeah.
How do you foster a supportive and inclusive classroom environment for students with special needs? How do you foster that? You're talking about the anxiety that students sometimes associate with a classroom and a lesson. How do you foster the opposite of that, which is, to make it supportive and nurturing?
One of the things to do is to recognise that children with special needs aren't a small cohort within a class. Everybody within the class has special needs, from the most vulnerable children to the teacher, to the head teacher. Everybody has special needs. Now, I know classrooms where the teachers are open about their own needs, their own dyslexia or their own mental health problems, their own OCD. I know work environments, social environments, and it comes from the top.
Transparency.
And this open statement to everybody from the beginning. We are all different, we are all vulnerable, we are all needful. Let's talk about this. And once we start talking about it, suddenly they're not special needs anymore, they're needs, and we all have them. And we can start to appreciate each other.
That's really refreshing. I've never thought about that we all have different needs. And isn't that so true? Honestly, I tell my students, guys, I'm great at English. Maths, don't ask me. Do not ask me, okay? And I'm also terrible at geography. I'll prove it to you. So I took a geography test, right, alongside the year 7, right? Oh, I was terrible. Got the continents wrong, got the rivers wrong. I got the worst marks. So I submitted it with the test that I was covering a lesson, right? And the teacher, you know how teachers mark, we just flip mark. And she's marking this paper. God, who is this? How am I such a bad teacher that this paper is one of my students? She's mortified. Then she saw the front, I put, oh, Mr. Ullah. And she goes, I'm going to have a conversation with him. So she pulled me and goes, Mr. Ullah, your mark was the worst. I said, I'm sorry, it's not my specialty. And, it was an icebreaker because teachers, there's the opposite idea, ideology, which is that, we are the masters in the classroom. Yes, you are, but for that subject, yes, you are the specialist in the classroom. However, we all have different needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful thing to do, to show the kids that you can't do certain things so that when they can't do something, they don't feel ashamed of it. Because that feeling of shame for not being able to do something is really deep.
That's probably my favorite thing I've heard today. Honestly, I heard a lot of things. That's my favorite thing because it's so true. It's such a refreshing mindset. I've never thought about that. I know it, but I've never really absorbed that point, and especially presenting it to the children.
Yeah.
Okay, so my third question was, what resources or tools do you find particularly helpful in addressing the individual needs of students with diverse needs? Are there any tools that you've come across in your time, toolkits?
So again, it's a pick and mix, really. And a lot of the time, the problem is that the schools don't have the resources to provide the resources. But to be honest with you, most kids have got one of these. Now, we have an issue in Britain at the moment, because in Britain, the question is, how do we stop kids using their mobile phones? I don't think we should stop kids using their mobile phones. I think we should teach them how to use their mobile phones properly. Because if they're using their mobile phones to sort of text their mates or whatever, well, okay, that's just another way of kids passing notes around class. It's a pain for the teacher. Is it dreadful for the learning? I don't know. Actually, I don't know if the results are in. I don't know if the research has been done. But what I do know is that there's text to speech on this, there's speech to text on this, I know there's translation on this, I know you can take a subject, let's say if you're doing geography, you can find the Google Maps for what you're looking at on this. I know there's so much you can do at your fingertips. And so there's so much around. Something I use, by the way, I use something called Elicit. E-L-I-C-I-T, Elicit. It's an AI tool that helps me do academic research. So while I'm doing academic research, normally in the old days, I'd have typed, well, in the old days, I'd have gone to the library and gone through the Dewey Decimal System, which it's hell. Then it got to, I'd just use the internet. Then it became Google Scholar. And you find Google Scholar and you type in keywords and then you go through all the things. What Elicit does, essentially, it simplifies that. So it goes through Google Scholar itself, essentially, and finds the things you want, summarizes them, and then you can say, that's what I want to read. So it's a really good sorting device, and it takes away the pain of having to read through so much, because reading is still a very slow process for me. And so I use things that allow me to bypass those things which are difficult for me. I know some people who use a lot of text-to-speech mechanisms, things like Orcam and scanning pens and these things. I know some people who use speech-to-text, so they talk and it comes up on a screen. I know some people who use overlays. Now, I've never been convinced of the value of overlays, but I know that some people swear by them, so why not?
Overlays?
Yeah, so some people find that they have visual stress, and that if you use, for instance, a very faint blue or faint yellow plastic sheet over a sheet of white paper with black writing on it, it reduces the contrast, and that can make reading a little bit easier. Some people have these on their glasses. You can go to an optician and have them fitted onto your lenses, and so it can reduce the glare from page to text. And soften it a little bit and make it easier to read. Some people with Ehrlich syndrome or visual stress have found real benefit from this kind of thing.
I'm trying to make it a bit more accessible for them, so they'll find the images in the poem and they'll draw it, and they'll find the quote that relates to the image, and they'll color the image in. They'll own those 4 or 5 quotes. So
yeah, this is a really good thing. So let's go back to a question we asked earlier and say, why are we educating? What's education for? Well, one of the things that the great educational philosopher John Dewey once said is that education is a preparation for life, but actually education is life. And what we can't do is we can't make education different from the rest of life. Now, if you're in a social situation or a business situation, there is no such thing as doing poetry. Everybody has a different role in that, and there are different things we're trying to get out of that. And so different people do different things, and they collaborate. And so some people may be analysing a particular image or 2 particular images. Some people may be looking at the last 2 lines of the sonnet to see why those lines are the important lines of the sonnet. Something along those lines. But within a group of kids, you can get different people doing slightly different things, and together you get a far richer engagement with that poem than you ever would have done by simply asking everybody to do exactly the same. And so one of the great techniques is essentially, it's just a form of differentiation.
We're all working towards the same thing. It's a bit like an apprentice task. You guys are doing that. You guys are doing that. Okay, we'll feedback at the end. And it's not that those are the students with different learning needs and it's whittling. No. They're doing a very important job. They're doing what you want. We haven't got the time. It's a 50-minute lesson, right? Let's cut it down to about 35 minutes, and we're all working towards the same objective, which is understanding the poem.
Yep.
Wow, that's again blown my mind, Dr. Bloomfield. Honestly, I wanted to ask as a 4th question: what do you find has in your experience has been the most challenging aspect of teaching students with special needs?
What's difficult is gaining the trust of the kids, helping the kids want to learn, finding a way of protecting them against the dangers of the outside world. The school could be and should be a safe space from sometimes terribly difficult home lives. But generally speaking, it isn't a safe space. Why? Well, because there's bullying, because they're not doing very well at school, or because they're different, or because they feel that the teachers are bullying them by asking them to do things which they know they can't do, or all sorts of things. So we need to try to make that learning environment a safe learning environment. That's bottom up, top down. That's an entire. That's a big job, you know. It's a big job.
But I mean, it's the job of the educator. It's the job of the teacher to not differentiate, but not differentiate in the sense that these children are different. I loved your idea of we are all in this together. We're solving a puzzle. You know, I don't know if you remember, but there was a TV show when I was a kid, which was Crystal Maze, right? And the kids, they remember Crystal Maze, right? And the kids have Jungle Run, okay? Everyone has a job, right? We all have a job to do, boys and girls, right? Well, the objective is to understand this poem, but we are going to tackle it together. This team is doing that. This team is doing this. And if you imagine a kid that comes with special needs and comes to our classroom, in this lesson, I'm a team member. I'm not seen as being different. With this teacher, I'm supported. I feel safe here. I don't feel different. You know, I don't feel anxiety. I feel I'm one with the other kids, and because of that, they don't bully me, and I don't feel anxious about talking to them, and we can work together. I think that's the role of the educator. It has to stem from them, because, you know, as a teacher, you're in charge of the space. You're also in charge of the atmosphere and the environment that you create in your classroom.
Yeah, 100%.
Tell me more about blended learning. Because I've heard so many. I would love to hear your approach to it, because I've heard other interpretations. I wanted to hear yours.
Here's just one example of a school where I've seen blended learning. The topic or the subject for a particular term or semester was travel. And so certain classrooms were particular countries. And these classrooms were decked out like that country might be. So with things from Brazil, or with things from Qatar, or with things from South Korea or something. One room was a travel agent, and the kids in there were dealing with requests to fly and the payments and organising flights. Another room was about I think it was about cultures or something, and the entire school had a theme, and the kids were moving from room to room doing different things. They were in one room they were listening to the music from South Korea. In another room they were, you know, they were learning the German language or whatever, because that's one of the countries that they were dealing with. And this is blended learning, where you haven't, essentially, school is filled with boxes.
They come out of one box, go into another box. Very pretty box with displays and borders and everything, but a box nonetheless.
The time is boxes as well. So you got blocks of whatever it is in school, 45 minutes in one school or whatever it is. You got blocks of time, you got blocks of physical space, you've got blocks of subjects, and these boxes are separate from each other. But actually, blended learning is when you open the boxes and you start to explore how you can bring them together. And I guarantee that if you do, that's when you get that, as I called it, multi-sensory learning. I don't mean multi-sensory in that old sense, but that's when you get lots of things happening. That's when you get learning, actually, it's like the real world almost. And it's also guided and facilitated. I go back to the philosopher John Dewey. What's the role of a teacher? The teacher is of a guide, a facilitator, a mentor, somebody who provides barriers, somebody who provides goals, but somebody who is not there with a whip and a cane telling kids you must do this. Somebody who's there to encourage and to provide assistance and boundaries. And so blended learning like that is a magical thing to see. It's absolutely magical thing to see.
There's such a fear, isn't it, that, they're just, like you said, there isn't enough time.
Yeah, and the other fear that people have, not only about you're absolutely right, but there's another fear that people think that somehow blended learning won't give you the grades. But actually, that's not necessarily true. If it's done well, it will produce the grades just as well as, if not better, than traditional learning.
I think schools could benefit from at least one blended day a week, or once a month, or end of the term, a blended day. Let's try it out and let's see how it goes.
And you get the kids to help blend.
Oh yeah.
What we need to do is we need to make sure that the kids are involved in this process of setting up blended learning, because it's their learning. It's not our learning for them, it's their learning. And and that act of setting up some form of blended learning environment is an act of learning.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And they will take more away from that than, here we go, another lesson, title, learning objective, do the starter, right, let's do the main, right, let's get to the plenary. And it's the same old, same old. They won't remember. They'll remember those like you say, those memorable experiences more, and they'll take more from it. And you could stand up in front of kids, right, and talk to them how to build a rocket to the moon. And if they're not interested, if they're not vested in it, they're not going to care. Whereas if you create a situation where they're exploring different parts of the engine and putting it together, they'll take to that more, because it's fun, and they feel like a sense of ownership, as opposed to just being told, in a prescriptive way.
Yeah.
Well, I only had one more question for you, which was, do you think small nurture classes are effective, where you put students with different needs together, creating a small nurture classroom? Or does setting not work for students with special needs?
Well, essentially, again, it's a very similar question. Do we integrate or do we differentiate in learning? Do we take kids to different classes? I think there's a role for it. I think that a lot of SEND kids will find themselves learning better if they feel that they're in a safe environment. And so if we're creating, essentially, if we think of it in terms of creating safe environments where they can learn, what we don't want to do, though, is we don't want to make them have to miss other things in order to do that. So the challenge is essentially saying, okay, we're not taking away your free time, we're not taking away your play time, we're not taking away your favourite lessons. We're taking away the time that actually can be taken and making it valuable.
Dr. Martin Bloomfield, this has been an absolute pleasure, and honestly, there's things that you've said that I will carry with me the rest of my life as an educator, because I've had special needs students for such a long time, but I've never had a conversation about it, and I highly appreciate the work that SENCOs and special needs teachers do. It really is a challenge. And
as I said, there's differentiation, like we talked about with poetry. There's audiobooks. There's watching the movie. There's scanning for particular words. There's all sorts of things that we can do. We don't simply have to say, right, kids, everybody begin on page 1, and let's trudge on to the end.
God. And see who's left standing.
See who's left standing. Because I guarantee it wouldn't have been me. I can tell you that. And even today, it wouldn't be me.
It's been such a pleasure, and I really appreciate your time.
For me too, mate. For me too. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for wanting to know. I mean...
No, as soon as I saw your message on LinkedIn, I said, I've heard this name. So I looked into some of your work, and I said, I mean, to be honest, I just, went for broke, and I asked you, can I do a Zoom call with you and talked about it, and lo and behold, thankfully you agreed, and I was looking forward to talking to you all day. I was getting through my day, going through my lessons, my marking, and so on. And so today I'm going to be having a very, very in-depth discussion, and you didn't disappoint. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, mate. That's lovely of you.